My mother-in-law whispered, "You'll never get his inheritance." And she was right. That sentence has echoed in my head for years, like a curse I didn't believe in until it came true. She said it quietly, right next to me, her lips barely moving, her perfume thick with roses and something bitter underneath. It was at my wedding, of all places. I remember her veil of politeness, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes as she pinned a diamond brooch onto my dress and leaned in close. Everyone around us clapped and cheered, thinking it was a blessing. But only I heard her whisper, "You'll never get his inheritance." I thought it was jealousy, or maybe a cruel joke. I laughed it off that day, convincing myself she'd warm up to me eventually. I didn't know then that those 6 words were a warning, not of what she'd say, but of what she'd do. Normal life setup. Before the cracks began to show, my life with Daniel felt good. Not perfect, but steady. He was kind, patient, the type of man who brewed my tea exactly how I liked it, strong, with a splash of milk and no sugar. We met when I was 26, working as a junior accountant at a small firm in Durban. He came in for a consultation, a quiet man with tired eyes and the kind of politeness that made people trust him. He wasn't flashy, though everyone in town knew his family was old money. The Greed's family owned half the land along the coast. Still, Daniel lived simply, driving an old Toyota, eating at family diners. I liked that. When he proposed 2 years later, my friends teased me, saying I'd landed a golden fish. But I didn't care about his money. I grew up watching my parents struggle and fight over it. I wanted peace, not wealth. And for a while, that's exactly what I got. We moved into a modest house his father gifted us. Nothing extravagant, but warm and bright, with white curtains that fluttered in the breeze. I decorated it myself, bought small succulents for the windowsills, stitched new pillow covers, and spent weekends baking banana bread. Daniel's father, Mr. Greaves, would visit often, always with fresh oranges or jars of honey from his farm. He'd sit in our kitchen, tell me stories about Daniel's childhood, and laugh until his shoulders shook. I loved him like my own father. But then there was her, Margaret, Daniel's mother. Margaret had a way of making me feel small without saying much. Her compliments always came with invisible hooks. "Oh, what a lovely dress. I see you finally found something that fits your figure." Or, "Daniel never used to eat spicy food before, but I suppose he's adjusting." She'd say these things with a smile that fooled everyone but me. I tried, truly. I brought her flowers, remembered her birthday, even helped her plan Daniel's surprise 35th party. She'd nod and thank me, but there was always distance, a coldness behind her eyes. Daniel brushed it off. "That's just Mom," he'd say. "She's protective." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't want me there. Not as her son's wife, not as part of their family. It wasn't until after Daniel's father fell ill that her mask began to crack. The illness came fast. Pancreatic cancer. We spent months between hospitals and home visits. I was there almost every day, cooking meals, cleaning up after the nurses left, helping him eat when his hands trembled. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd sit by his bed and read old novels aloud, just so he'd hear a human voice. He'd smile weakly and say, "You remind me of my late sister, always caring, always steady." But Margaret, she'd come and go, only when it suited her, and when she was there, she'd take over everything, rearrange the medicine, scold the nurse, criticize my cooking. Once, she even accused me of taking over the household, as if I was performing for praise. One evening, when Daniel had gone to fetch his father's medication, she cornered me in the hallway. Her perfume used sharp, the kind that stings your nose. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "You think you've done enough to earn his favor, don't you?" I didn't know how to respond. "I'm just helping," I said quietly. Her lips curled. "Helping," she repeated, almost laughing. Then, leaning closer, she whispered, the same way she did on my wedding day, "Don't fool yourself, dear. You'll never get his inheritance." This time, her tone was colder. Not a warning, a declaration. And something about the way she said it sent a chill through me. That night, I told Daniel. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "She's just stressed," he said. "Dad's dying. You know how she gets." I let it go. But a small seed of doubt had already been planted. A few weeks later, Mr. Greaves passed away. The funeral was quiet, somber. It rained that day. The kind of rain that feels endless, like the sky is grieving too. Daniel stood still beside me, his hand cold in mine. Margaret didn't cry. Not once. She stood tall, stoic, greeting guests with that same poised smile. And when it was time for the reading of the will, she insisted everyone gather at the house that same evening. I didn't expect anything from the inheritance, truly. All I hoped was that Daniel would get what was rightfully his, and that his father's legacy would stay in good hands. But when the lawyer opened the brown envelope, my heart began to race. Not out of greed, but out of unease. As he read through the document, I caught Margaret watching me. Her fingers tapped the armrest rhythmically, her lips faintly curved upward. The words echoed in the room. "All properties, savings, and assets shall be transferred to my wife, Margaret Greaves. Upon her passing, said assets shall be divided among Daniel and his sister, Claire." And then came the line that made my stomach drop. "In the event of Daniel's death, all assets shall revert solely to Margaret. No mention of me, not even as a secondary beneficiary." It wasn't about the money. It was what it meant. I wasn't part of their family. Not really. She had made sure of that. And when the lawyer finished, she turned to me with that same polite smile and said, "You'll be fine, dear. Daniel will take care of you." I nodded, holding back tears. Because in that moment, I finally understood what she'd whispered years ago. And she'd been right. Life after the will reading moved in quiet ripples, calm on the surface, but something underneath had shifted forever. Daniel tried to reassure me. "She just wants to handle things her way," he said. "When the time comes, it'll all be divided anyway." But I noticed the way he avoided his mother's calls, how he'd tense whenever her name appeared on his phone. Grief was changing him, making him quieter, more distracted. He started spending long nights in the study, saying he had to go over the family estate accounts. I'd find him at 2 a.m, staring at spreadsheets and bank papers, the light from his laptop washing his face pale. He'd close it the moment I walked in. "Just numbers," he'd say. "Nothing important." Still, something didn't feel right. A month later, Margaret invited us to Sunday lunch. Her house was always immaculate, silver cutlery lined like soldiers, chandeliers so polished you could see your reflection. But that day, something about it felt colder. The moment we arrived, I could sense tension. Claire, Daniel's sister, barely met my eyes. Margaret greeted me with that same tight smile. "You're looking rested," she said. We sat around her heavy oak dining table, the smell of roasted lamb filling the air. Daniel tried to make small talk, but every conversation seemed to circle back to money. Margaret kept mentioning responsibility, heritage, and family control. At one point, she looked at Daniel and said, "You should consider moving back into the main house. It's better to keep the property close to family." Daniel hesitated. "Mom, we're fine where we are." Her voice softened, but carried an edge. That little house was a gift, temporary. "This," she gestured around the marble-floored room. "This is where you belong. Not out there. Out there." That's how she always referred to our home, like it was a different world, something beneath them. I tried to smile, to ignore the sting, but the air felt thick. When dessert came, she reached across the table, placed her hand over Daniel's, and said quietly, "Your father trusted me with everything. Don't let outsiders come between what's yours." Outsiders. She didn't need to say my name. Daniel's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. That night, on the drive home, he didn't speak. The rain tapped against the windshield, the wipers moving rhythmically, and all I could think about was that word, outsiders. When we got home, he went straight to bed without saying goodnight. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the last slice of her apple tart she had packed for us. It tasted sweet, but I couldn't swallow. Weeks passed, and the distance between us grew. Daniel became secretive, quiet, preoccupied. He took calls in the garage, muted his phone around me, and started spending weekends sorting paperwork at his mother's estate. I told myself not to worry. He was grieving. Maybe this was his way of coping. But then the small things started. Bank notifications on his phone that weren't there before. Letters from the estate lawyer that he'd hide in his drawer. Once, when I went to do laundry, I found a crumpled envelope in his jeans pocket. Inside was a bank statement, transfers to his mother's account. Large sums. Repeated. That night, I asked him about it. He froze, then forced a laugh. "It's just estate maintenance. Don't read too much into it." I nodded, but the way he said it, too quick, too defensive, made something twist inside me. One evening, I decided to drive to the Greaves estate myself. I told myself it was just to drop off a casserole, to check on Margaret. But deep down, I wanted to see, to know. When I arrived, the iron gates were open. Her car was parked out front, and I could hear voices inside. Daniel's voice. I hesitated at the door, but it was slightly ajar. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. But the moment I heard my name, I froze. "She doesn't need to know," Daniel was saying. Margaret's tone was low, firm. "If you tell her, she'll make a scene. You know how emotional she gets. You're doing the right thing keeping things quiet." There was a pause, then Daniel's voice again, softer. "It just doesn't feel right, Mom. She's my wife." Her answer was sharp. "She's your wife, yes, but she's not part of this family's legacy. You have to protect what's yours before it's too late." I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. It wasn't just money anymore. It was loyalty. I turned quietly, trying not to make a sound, but the floor creaked under my shoe. Within seconds, the door opened. Margaret stood there, perfectly composed, as if she'd known I was outside the entire time. Her lips curved into that same polished smile. "Ah, dear, you should have called first. We weren't expecting you." Her eyes flicked to the casserole dish in my hands. Still playing the good wife, I see. Daniel appeared behind her, his face pale. "Lena," he started, but I cut him off. "It's fine," I said quietly. "I just came to drop this off." I set the dish down on the table, keeping my eyes on him for a brief moment, long enough for him to see that I'd heard everything. Then I turned and left. That night, Daniel came home late. He didn't say where he'd been. When I asked, he just sighed. "Please, Lena, don't make this harder." "Harder," I repeated. "What exactly am I making harder, Daniel? Hiding things from me? Or pretending your mother's the only family you have?" He looked at me with tired eyes, the kind that once held warmth, but now only guilt. "You don't understand," he said softly. "It's complicated." I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but instead I just whispered, "Then make me understand." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he said, "I promised my father I'd protect the estate. That's all." Then he turned away. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy. I got up, walked into the study, and stared at the locked drawer where he kept his files. For the first time in my marriage, I considered breaking it open. My hands shook as I held the small spare key I'd found months ago while cleaning. And as I slid it into the lock, my reflection caught in the window. Tired eyes, trembling lips, and I realized something painful. I wasn't just afraid of losing money. I was afraid of losing him. Still, I turned the key. A lock clicked open with a soft metallic sigh. For a second, I hesitated, my conscience and curiosity pulling at each other like two ropes tied around my chest. Then I opened the drawer. Inside were neat stacks of papers, bank statements, property documents, letters from lawyers. Everything was organized too perfectly, as if he'd prepared for someone to find them. I flipped through them with trembling fingers, scanning for something, anything that would make sense of his secrecy. Then I found it. A legal document, crisp and recent. Amendment to property deed, joint ownership transfer. At first, I thought it was for the house we lived in. But the details didn't match. The address listed was the family estate, the Greaves farm. And where there should have been my husband's name under joint owner, there was hers, Margaret Greaves. My breath caught. The document was signed, witnessed, and stamped, dated just 2 weeks after his father's funeral. I felt the room tilt slightly. My heart raced so fast it was painful. Daniel had given away his share. To her. I kept reading, desperate for an explanation. Below the signature, there was a clause. In the event of Daniel Greaves's passing, all properties revert fully to Margaret Greaves. The same clause as in his father's will. The same curse, rewritten. My knees went weak, and I sat on the floor, clutching the papers to my chest. The lamp flickered, throwing my shadow long across the room. All this time, I thought I'd married a man, but I'd married a family, a legacy, and I was never meant to be part of it. When Daniel came home the next evening, I was waiting in the living room. The documents were spread neatly across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. He froze when he saw them. "Lena, what are you doing?" I stood slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I could ask you the same thing, Daniel." He rubbed his face, sighing. "I was going to tell you." "When?" I snapped. "After everything was gone. After your mother finished erasing me from your life." His silence was answer enough. I picked up the deed, held it up to him. "You gave her your share." "Why?" He looked down, his shoulders slumping. "She said it was temporary, that it would make managing the taxes easier while we sort things out." "Do you believe that?" I asked quietly. He didn't look at me. "She's my mother, Lena. She wouldn't—" "She would," I cut in, my voice broke. "And she has." "She warned me on our wedding day, Daniel. She whispered it to me, that I'd never get your inheritance. I thought she was just being cruel. But she was telling me the truth." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I just wanted peace, Lena. She's been controlling everything since Dad died. If I didn't agree, she threatened to cut me off entirely. Peace." I laughed bitterly. "You call this peace? Signing away everything your father built. Everything he wanted you to have." He looked at me then, truly looked at, and there was something defeated in his eyes. "She said I wasn't ready, that I'd ruin things, that you'd influence me." I stared at him, the words cutting deeper than any document could. "So that's what she told you, that I'm the problem?" He didn't deny it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, steady, merciless. Finally, I said, "You didn't just give her your inheritance, Daniel. You gave her us." He opened his mouth to speak, but I walked past him, my heart pounding. I needed air, space, anything but this suffocating silence. That night, I drove aimlessly through the rain until I ended up at the small cafe where Daniel and I had met years ago. It was closed, but the sign still flickered faintly. I sat in the car and cried, quietly, bitterly. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about trust, about realizing that love wasn't enough when loyalty was divided. When I got home hours later, the house was dark. Daniel was asleep on the couch, an empty glass of whiskey beside him. On the table, he'd left a note. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix it. Maybe Mom's right. Maybe you deserve better." My hands shook as I read it. He'd never said those words before, and yet, instead of comfort, they felt like surrender. The next morning, I decided to confront Margaret. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to armor myself. A simple black dress, my hair tied back. No tears, no trembling hands. When I arrived at the estate, she was in the garden, pruning roses. The smell was overwhelming, sweet and sharp, like her perfume. "Ah," she said without looking up. "The prodigal daughter-in-law." I walked closer, clutching the folder in my hand. "You won, Margaret," I said quietly. "You got everything you wanted." She finally looked up, her eyes glinting in the sunlight. "Don't sound so dramatic, dear. It's just business. You wouldn't understand." I took a step closer. "You took advantage of him when he was grieving." Her lips curved slightly. "I protected what's ours." "Ours?" I repeated. "You mean yours." She turned back to her roses, clipping another stem. "Men are weak when they're sad. Women like us should know better than to let emotions run the show." I swallowed hard. "You destroyed your own son's peace for control." She paused, her hand tightening on the shears. Then she said, without turning, "Peace is overrated. Power lasts longer." Something inside me went cold. I placed the folder on the garden table beside her and whispered, "You may have his inheritance, but you'll never have his respect. Or mine." Then I left. That night, Daniel didn't come home. The next morning, I found his car gone, his phone switched off. By evening, Margaret called. Her tone was calm, almost pleasant. "Daniel's here," she said. "He needs space. Don't call again." Then she hung up. It took me 2 full days to drive there again. When I arrived, the gates were locked this time. Through the bars, I saw Daniel on the porch, staring blankly into space. Margaret stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, like she was presenting a trophy. He didn't look at me, didn't even blink. And that was when I knew I hadn't just lost the inheritance, I'd lost my husband too. For 3 days, I didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't even cry. Grief has a strange way of hollowing you out. Not loud, not violent, just empty. I'd walk from room to room, noticing small things that used to mean something. Daniel's mug still in the sink, his jacket draped over the chair, the faint smell of his cologne in the hallway. Every trace of him felt like a ghost refusing to leave. But by the 4th morning, something inside me shifted. I remember standing by the kitchen window, sunlight cutting through the blinds, lighting the dust in the air, and I thought, no, she doesn't get to win like this. If she wanted to strip me of dignity, I'd show her what it looked like to lose everything and still stand tall. I began by visiting a lawyer. Her name was Sarah Patel, calm, sharp-eyed, with that kind of quiet strength that makes you trust her before she even speaks. When I told her what happened, she listened without interrupting, her fingers lightly tapping a pen against her notebook. After I finished, she asked, "Do you have any proof that Daniel's decision was made under undue influence?" I hesitated. "I have the documents, and I know his mother manipulated him, but proof," I sighed, "not the kind a court cares about." She nodded slowly. "Then we gather it, quietly. Every paper trail, every conversation, every inconsistency. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something like hope. That afternoon, I returned home and began digging. Emails, texts, notes. Daniel wasn't the most organized man, but he had a habit of keeping receipts, literal and emotional ones. I found threads of messages between him and his mother. Margaret, you know she'll spend it all, Daniel. Daniel, that's not true, Mom. Lena's careful. Margaret, she's careful now. Wait until she gets a taste of real money. And later, Margaret, I've spoken to the lawyer. It's easier if I manage the deed for now. You can always change it later. Daniel, are you sure? Lena might not like it. Margaret, you let me handle Lena. That last line hit me like a slap. I printed every word, each page burning hotter than the last in my hands. Then I remembered something, a voicemail. Weeks before the will reading, Daniel had left his phone on the table while I cleaned. I'd overheard his mother's voice through the speaker. At the time, I hadn't paid attention. But maybe it was still saved in his backups. I searched through his old phone, scrolling through the archives until I found it. Mom, voicemail, 3 Mins, April 17th. I pressed play. Her voice came through, smooth as honey. Daniel, darling, I know you're under pressure, but trust me, you'll thank me later. That girl only married you for what you'll inherit. I'm only protecting you. Sign the documents, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. We can deal with her afterward. Afterward. I paused the recording and just sat there. Not crying, not even shaking, just stunned. Because there it was, the truth, captured in her own words. The next morning, I went back to Sarah's office with a flash drive and a folder full of printed messages. She listened to the voicemail, her expression tightening. This, she said softly, changes everything. Over the next few days, Sarah drafted a formal petition contesting the transfer, citing manipulation and coercion. We weren't just fighting for property now. We were fighting for the truth. When the papers were filed, Margaret's composure cracked for the first time. She called me that evening, her voice low and sharp like a blade. How dare you drag this family into court? You dragged it there the moment you lied, I said evenly. Her tone turned icy. You think anyone will believe you? You're just an outsider who couldn't handle her place. Maybe, I said, but outsiders have less to lose. Then I hung up. The following week, Daniel came to see me. He looked thinner, his face drawn, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. He stood in the doorway for a moment before whispering, "Why are you doing this?" I swallowed the ache in my throat. Because it's wrong, Daniel. What she did to you, to us, it's not love. It's control. He shook his head weakly. She said you'd twist things, that you'd turn me against her. I stepped closer, holding out the flash drive. Then listen for yourself. He stared at it, hesitant, but finally took it. That night, around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. I listened. I'm sorry. Just 2 words, but they broke something open inside me. A week later, the court ordered a preliminary hearing. Daniel attended, sitting beside me for the first time in months. Margaret sat across the room, dressed in her usual pearls and pressed suit, her expression unreadable. The judge played the voicemail aloud. The sound filled the quiet courtroom, her silky tone dripping with condescension and deceit. I didn't look at her, but I could feel the tension radiating from her seat. When the audio ended, there was silence. Then Daniel's lawyer stood and said simply, "My client was misled. The transfer was made under emotional duress." Margaret shifted, her hand gripping her purse tighter. The judge adjourned the hearing for review, but the damage was done. For the first time, people saw her for what she was. Not a grieving matriarch, but a manipulator cloaked in gentility. Outside the courthouse, Daniel turned to me. His voice cracked when he said, "I didn't know, Lena, I swear." I looked at him, the man I'd loved, the man who'd lost himself trying to please a mother who never truly let him grow. "I believe you," I said softly, "but belief doesn't fix everything." He nodded. "Maybe not, but maybe it's a start." That evening, a local paper picked up the story. Family feud over inheritance. Son accuses mother of manipulation. It spread faster than gossip in a church parking lot. By the next day, half the town knew. And the woman who once held her head higher than everyone else couldn't even show her face at the grocery store. But me, for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not victory, not revenge. Just peace. Because I'd stopped letting her write my story for me. I didn't go to church the Sunday after the hearing, but I heard from a neighbor that Margaret did, and that half the congregation turned their faces away when she walked in. It wasn't cruelty. It was that quiet kind of distance people give when they've seen too much truth to pretend anymore. In a small town, appearances matter, and for years she'd been the picture of perfection. Always hosting charity events, always whispering prayers, loud enough for others to hear. But now every smile looked like a mask, every handshake rehearsed. A week later, I was called back for the final review. The judge's tone was calm but firm as he read through the findings. Given the evidence presented, particularly the recorded message and corroborating correspondence, the court finds reasonable grounds that undue influence was exerted upon the late Mr. Daniel Matthews regarding his testamentary decisions. It was like hearing my breath return to my body. Then he added, "The estate shall be equitably divided between the surviving spouse and next of kin." Equitably. Not everything, but enough. Enough to start again. Enough to know that truth still mattered in a world that often rewards the cruelest whisperers. When the gavel struck, Margaret's face didn't move, but her hand trembled ever so slightly, clutching the edge of her chair. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not because of the money, but because her power had cracked. Outside the courthouse, Daniel approached me slowly. He looked humbled, not defeated, just smaller somehow. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "I came to say thank you." I studied his face. There were lines there that hadn't been before. Worry lines, regret lines. "Thank you for what?" I asked. "For making me see her clearly. For standing up even when I couldn't." I wanted to say something kind, but the words stuck. So instead, I said the truth. "Daniel, I loved you. Maybe a part of me always will. But love without respect is just devotion in chains." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know. I learned that too late." We stood there in the courtyard for a long moment. The sun warm on our faces, the sound of traffic in the distance. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. The news of the verdict spread fast. Within days, people who used to praise Margaret began avoiding her. The women who'd once whispered gossip about me at the salon now turned those whispers toward her. At the market, I overheard someone say, "Imagine doing that to your own son's wife, the poor woman." I didn't correct them. I didn't even stop to listen longer. Some things don't need your energy anymore. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Margaret stood there. No pearls this time, no lipstick, just a plain beige coat and tired eyes. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "You ruined my reputation." I almost laughed, not cruelly, just at the irony. "I didn't ruin anything," I said softly. "I just stopped protecting your lies." She looked down, her hands trembling. "I did what I thought was right. Daniel's all I have. I couldn't let him be taken advantage of." I took a breath, the ache of years sitting in my chest. "You didn't protect him, Margaret. You controlled him. You made him believe love was obedience. That's not protection, that's fear." Her lips parted. like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. After a moment, she whispered, "He doesn't speak to me anymore." I didn't gloat. I couldn't. Because even though she'd caused me so much pain, she was still a mother, standing in the ruins of her own making. "I hope someday he does," I said quietly. "But not because you guilt him into it. Because he wants to." Her eyes filled, and for a moment, just one, I saw something human there. Regret, maybe, or the faint memory of love that used to be pure before pride twisted it. Then she turned, walked down the steps, and left. I watched her go, not with hatred, but with something sadder. Pity, maybe. In the weeks that followed, I began putting my life back together. I sold the house that carried too many ghosts and moved into a smaller one by the river, a place with light in the morning and silence at night. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, the canvases were dark, heavy strokes of gray and blue like storms that wouldn't end. But over time, softer colors started creeping in, yellows, greens, small bursts of pink. Healing doesn't come like thunder. It seeps in quietly, through moments of peace you barely notice, until they're all you have. Daniel eventually wrote me a letter. He said he'd moved out of his mother's house and was in therapy. He ended it with, "I'm learning how to be someone who thinks for himself. Thank you for being brave when I wasn't." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Some wounds are better left with gentle closure. Months passed. The estate was finally settled, and with my share, I donated part of it to a women's shelter. It felt right, to turn something born of greed into something that could protect others. One evening, I walked by the courthouse again, the same place where everything had shifted. The lights glowed softly through the windows, and the air smelled faintly of rain. And I thought about Margaret, how power built on fear always collapses, how truth doesn't roar, it whispers patiently until the world has to listen. I smiled then, not out of triumph, but gratitude. Because sometimes justice isn't about winning. It's about surviving with your soul intact. The months after the court case felt like waking up after a long illness. My body was the same, but my spirit, it had changed shape. The silence in my new home didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like permission. I began every morning with tea on the porch, watching sunlight spill over the river. The air smelled faintly of dew and jasmine from the wild bushes nearby. Sometimes, when the wind was gentle, I'd close my eyes and listen. To birds, to the water, to the rhythm of life carrying on. There was peace in the ordinary, and I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it. One afternoon, I was cleaning out old boxes when I found a photo of Daniel and me from our wedding day. We looked young, so full of hope, so sure love could carry us through anything. I sat with that photo for a long while. It didn't hurt like before. It just reminded me that even the most painful chapters begin with good intentions. I decided to keep it, not as a relic of loss, but as proof that I'd once loved deeply, and that I'd survived it. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or music. It happens slowly, in the way your shoulders loosen when you laugh again, or how your breath steadies when you stop bracing for the next blow. For me, healing came through small kindnesses. The neighbor, Mrs. Haynes, would drop by with fresh bread from her oven. A little girl from next door brought me daisies she'd picked from the yard. Even strangers at the market, people who'd once looked at me with pity, now smiled with quiet respect. I wasn't the woman whose mother-in-law stole her inheritance anymore. I was just Lena, the woman who had been through the storm and come out clean on the other side. Around that time, Daniel reached out again. He didn't call this time. He wrote another letter. "I'm seeing things clearer now," he wrote. "It's strange. I thought having less money would make me feel small, but it's the first time I felt free. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better, for myself, not for her. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't need to. I wrote back simply, we both did what we thought we had to do. Maybe pain was the only way we'd ever learn who we are. I never heard from him again, but that was okay. Some stories aren't meant to circle back. They're meant to end softly, like a candle burning out when it's done its job. That spring, the town held a small art fair by the river. Sarah, my lawyer, convinced me to show a few of my paintings. I almost said no. Fear still had a habit of whispering that I wasn't ready. But something inside me nudged. Go. So I did. I displayed 3 pieces. One of a storm breaking over water. One of hands letting go of a rope. And one, my favorite, of a woman standing beneath a willow tree, her hair blowing in the wind, her eyes closed, her face turned toward light. I called it Inheritance. People stopped to look. Some even asked to buy it. But I didn't sell that one. It wasn't for anyone else. It was my story on canvas, my proof that beauty could be born from betrayal. A few weeks later, I ran into Margaret again. It was at the pharmacy. She looked thinner, quieter. Her hair had grayed at the roots, and the sharpness in her eyes had softened to something weary. We stood there for a long moment, neither quite knowing what to say. Finally, she murmured, "You look well." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." She hesitated, then said, "I heard you're painting again." "I am." She nodded slowly. "That's good. Daniel told me about the art fair." It surprised me that she mentioned his name with no bitterness, just a kind of tired affection. "I hope he's doing all right," I said. "He is," she said softly. "He's distant, but I understand why." I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see a villain. I saw a woman terrified of losing control, who mistook possession for love. We parted without harsh words. That, I realized later, was our peace treaty. Unspoken, but real. As summer came, my days began to fill with quiet routines. Painting, walking by the river, tending to a small garden. Each moment felt like a small reclaiming of life. And sometimes, when I'd sit by the water at dusk, I'd think about everything that had happened, not with anger, but with understanding. I'd think of how easy it is to lose yourself when you're trying to please others, how silence can be mistaken for weakness, and how standing up for yourself, even when your voice shakes, is the loudest kind of courage. One evening, I was closing my curtains when I noticed a young couple arguing by the street. They looked so much like Daniel and me in our early years, full of pride, love, and stubbornness. The woman saw me watching and gave an embarrassed smile. I smiled back, mouthed, "It gets better." And I meant it, because it does get better. Once you stop trying to win everyone's approval and start fighting for your own peace. Sometimes I wonder if Margaret ever looks back and thinks about those words she whispered to me the night before the funeral. "You'll never get his inheritance." She was right, in a way. I didn't get his inheritance. I got something far more valuable. I inherited myself, my strength, my voice, my peace. And that's something no one can write you out of. When I look back on everything now, it almost feels like watching someone else's life, a film I once acted in but have long since walked away from. The pain, the betrayal, the long courtroom days, they're all memories now, faded but not forgotten. Because the truth is, some scars don't disappear. They just stop hurting. They become part of your story, proof that you made it through. If I've learned anything from all of this, it's that silence can be the cruelest kind of prison. For years, I let other people's opinions define my worth. A husband's approval, a mother-in-law's judgment, society's gaze. I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. But peace that demands silence isn't peace, it's surrender. It took losing almost everything for me to understand that dignity is not something others give you. It's something you claim, one brave choice at a time. When Margaret whispered, "You'll never get his inheritance," she meant to wound me. But in a strange way, she was right. Because what I inherited was not wealth, not property, not a name in some legal document. I inherited resilience. I inherited truth. I inherited the strength to start again. And when I finally learned to forgive, not for her, not even for Daniel, but for myself, that was when I truly became free. If you're listening to this and you've ever been made to feel small, unseen, or undeserving, please remember, the world might strip you of titles, money, or relationships, but no one can take away your voice. Not if you choose to keep it. Sometimes life's cruelest betrayal is the one that teaches you how to stand tall. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed gives you everything you actually do. And sometimes the inheritance you were denied becomes the one you create with your own two hands. I don't hate Margaret anymore. I don't even pity her. I just see her as a mirror of what happens when love becomes fear, when control replaces care. We all have a choice, to become bitter or to become better. And I chose better. Now, when people ask me if I ever wish things had turned out differently, I just smile and say, no. Because if they hadn't, I'd still be the woman waiting for approval, not the woman who learned to approve of herself. So, tell me, if someone took from you not your money, but your peace, would you fight for it? Would you walk away? Or would you rebuild, piece by piece, until your life belonged to you again? Let me know what you do in the comments. And if my story spoke to you, stay a little longer. There are more stories here about love, loss, and the quiet strength it takes to find yourself again. Because in the end, that's what we all inherit, the power to begin anew.